The twin sons of Varine, 9 cast long, wavering shadows across the desert outpost as the shuttle descended, scattering grit against the reinforced landing pads. Sergeant Elias Kade stood beside the barracks, his boots half buried in sand, the wind tugging at the frayed edge of his scarf. He had seen 100 such arrivals, the same swaggering recruits stepping out with shining armor and cleaner eyes than they'd ever have again. The Galactic Coalition sent them from all corners of the known systems, scaled, feathered, or metallic, each convinced their civilization's weaponry was the pinnacle of warfare. Kade, gray-stubbled and human, was their instructor for the next 12 weeks. Most considered that an insult to their intelligence. The recruits disembarked in groups, adjusting their visors and translating helmets, murmuring in a dozen voices. Their weapons gleamed, plasma emitters, magnetic rifles, ion arcs. Beside them, Kade's own rifle leaned against a crate, old wood and black steel dulled by years of sand and oil. The inscription on the receiver, AKM 7.62 by 39 millimeters, was almost erased by time. When one of the reptilian soldiers, tall and broad, noticed it, his mouth twisted into a grin. "Does that relic still fire?" the translation unit chirped mockingly. The others laughed, the sound a mix of hisses, clicks, and trills. Kade didn't answer. He adjusted his gloves and spoke evenly, his voice gravelly but controlled. "Fall in, recruits. We'll begin with a live-fire simulation. You'll learn faster under the sun than in the classroom." They followed, some reluctantly, toward the dunes that stretched into the shimmering horizon. As they walked, one of the avian cadets leaned closer to another and whispered, "Why would they assign us a human fossil? No wonder their kind went extinct from frontline duty." Kade heard, but he let it pass. The desert had taught him patience. Arrogance burned itself out faster than heat stroke. At the training ridge, he set up the target drones. Their metal hides shimmered faintly, programmed to mimic adaptive resistance. Primitive compared to real enemies, but enough to make the recruits sweat. "Standard test," Kade said. "You'll engage from cover, short bursts, prioritize movement over fire rate. And no one touches the ion drones until you can hit the metal ones." The first volleys went up in bursts of blue and violet light. The sand vibrated with energy discharges, and soon the air smelled of ozone and scorched dust. The recruits hit targets easily, grinning and trading boasts. Kade watched through his lenses, expression unreadable. When the last target dropped, he gestured to the far ridge where a small, tougher drone emerged. Older model, its plating thick and irregular. "Your energy beams will scatter on that one," he said. "Now we test precision." They tried one by one. Plasma bolts diffused harmlessly across its surface. Magnetic slugs ricocheted. Even the ion core rifle made little more than a dent. The laughter died away. Kade knelt, brushing aside sand until his old rifle lay cradled across his knees. With slow, deliberate movements, he loaded a magazine, sighted the ridge, and fired. The mechanical crack echoed harshly against the dunes. The drone jerked once and fell, smoke curling from a neat hole punched through its core. The recruits stared. The reptilian soldier blinked twice, disbelief widening his eyes. Kade rose and dusted off his knees. "Technology's only as strong as what it hits," he said quietly. "And what it hits depends on who's holding it." Silence stretched, filled only by the desert wind. The avian lowered his weapon, uncertain now. Somewhere above, the suns began to dip, turning the dunes into rivers of molten gold. Kade slung the rifle over his shoulder, eyes on the darkening horizon. "Tomorrow, we train for what's coming. Out here, fancy toys won't save you. You'll learn what will." He started toward the base, leaving the recruits in the sand, the echo of that single gunshot still ringing between the dunes, an old sound in a new world, daring them to understand it. The storm arrived without warning, a roiling wall of amber dust that swallowed the horizon and smothered the suns. Sergeant Kade felt the pressure shift before the first gust struck, a deep tremor rolling through the sand like the planet itself had exhaled. The recruits tightened their formation, their earlier confidence dissolving as the wind howled against their armor. Kade raised a hand, signaling silence. Beneath the shriek of sand against plating, he heard something else, an uneven rhythm, soft but purposeful, skittering just beyond the storm's veil. The first marauder broke through the haze in a blur of chitin and jagged limbs. Its plated hide shimmered with natural refraction patterns, bending the fading light as though its body were carved from distorted glass. The recruits fired instantly, unleashing a volley of plasma that lit the swirling air in lavender streaks. The beams scattered on impact, tumbling harmlessly across the creature's armor before fading into the sand. The marauder shrieked, more annoyed than hurt, and lunged. Chaos erupted. A reptilian recruit stumbled backward, firing erratically. A silicon-based trooper attempted to stabilize the line, only for his magnetic rounds to ricochet off the creature's shoulder, nearly striking one of his own companions. Kade moved before panic could fully bloom. He grabbed the stumbling recruit, shoved him behind a dune crest, and shouted commands that cut through the storm like a drawn blade. Spread your fire lanes. Stop wasting charges. Those plates disperse heat faster than your rifles produce it. A second marauder burst from the dust, then a third, their bodies weaving through the dunes with terrifying agility. The avian recruit fired an ion arc. The bolt struck true, but the creature's armor absorbed the energy and discharged it in a harmless flicker. The cadet's wings bristled in fear. Kade saw the raw dread in the recruit's eyes, the sudden understanding that their beloved technology meant nothing here. He pushed forward, drawing their focus. Eyes up. These things track weakness. Hold your ground, or they'll carve you apart before you scream. A marauder lunged at him. Kade rolled aside, sand exploding beneath his boots, and the creature slammed into the dune where he had stood. He fired a short burst from a compact ballistic sidearm, but the rounds flattened against the creature's plating. The weapon clicked empty. Useless. He tossed it aside and retreated toward higher ground, motioning for the squad to follow. They scrambled behind a jagged ridge, breath ragged, armor scoured by sand. The reptilian recruit who had mocked him earlier leaned heavily on his rifle, his scales dulled by dust. "Sergeant," he rasped, "our weapons can't penetrate them." "We're these things." "Desert marauders," Kade said. "Predators adapted to swallow energy fire like water. Their plating's layered with refractive channels. You won't burn through it." He knelt, dragging a clawed plate from a fallen creature. The recruits flinched as he snapped it in half, revealing dense organic ridges beneath. But kinetic force doesn't scatter. It pushes. It breaks. These layers can't disperse momentum the same way. The avian's voice trembled. "So we're defenseless?" Kade shook his head. "No, but you're fighting the wrong way." Another distant shriek carried through the storm, sharper and angrier than before. The recruits looked to Kade, awaiting instruction not with arrogance now, but with raw, desperate trust. He felt the weight of their eyes and the storm pressing closer, sealing off escape. The time for gentle teaching had passed. He rose and gripped the strap across his chest, where an old, weathered shape rested against his armor. "Fall in," he said, voice steady despite the thunder of sand around them. "You're about to learn why humans kept some things the rest of the galaxy forgot." He stepped into the storm again, and the recruits followed, fear tempered by something newly forged belief. The storm swallowed Kade as he advanced, the grit stinging his weathered skin, but the weight of the rifle against his palms felt like an anchor in the chaos. Behind him, the recruits formed a loose line, their earlier panic tempered into wary determination. The marauders circled through the haze, their refractive armor shimmering like ripples in boiling air. Kade lifted the AKM, its iron sights steady despite the storm's fury, and waited for the rhythm he knew so well. The slight distortion that betrayed movement, the subtle shift in the dunes that told him where death approached. A marauder lunged from the right, a blur of glassy, plating, and serrated limbs. Kade fired a short, disciplined burst. The rifle barked with a harsh metallic crack that cut through the storm, and the creature's momentum halted as the rounds punched cleanly through the ridges of its armor. It collapsed in a twitching heap. The recruits stared, their disbelief momentarily displacing their fear. Kade didn't acknowledge their awe. He simply scanned for the next threat. "Hold your spacing," he ordered. "These things flank fast. Match their angles, not their speed." The reptilian recruit who once mocked him shifted into position beside a silicon-based trooper, mimicking Cade's posture. Another marauder broke through the swirling dust. This time the avian recruit fired a ballistic backup weapon, hastily loaded and poorly aimed. The shot skimmed off the creature's side, but disrupted its charge long enough for Kade to adjust. A single round from the AKM pierced the marauder's throat joint, dropping it instantly. The avian exhaled shakily. "I didn't think it would work." "It will," Kade replied, "if you stop fighting your tools and start using them." A low chorus of shrieks rippled through the storm. More marauders, drawn by the gunfire. Their silhouettes flickered like distorted shadows before materializing into brutal forms. Kade gestured toward a sloping dune that offered a natural firing arc. The recruits scrambled into position, their movements sharper now, guided by both urgency and trust. Kade knelt at the center of the line, stabilizing the rifle against his shoulder. The familiar recoil thumped into him, comforting in its predictability. The marauders charged in a pack. Plasma rifles would have lit the dunes with useless brilliance, but the coalition recruits now fired staggered kinetic rounds, coordinating as Kade had taught. Their shots were clumsy, but improving, hitting legs, exposed joints, and softer underplates. Cade's own fire threaded through theirs with ruthless precision, each burst thinning the swarm. Brass casings bounced across the sand, glinting briefly before being swallowed by the storm. One of the silicon troopers faltered as a marauder veered toward him. Without hesitation, the reptilian recruit pivoted and fired at close range, blowing out the creature's jaw. The two exchanged a tense, grateful glance before resetting their aim. It was the first moment of genuine cohesion they had shown. The wind intensified, turning the air opaque. Kade signaled a temporary ceasefire and listened. The absence of movement, the stillness between gusts, told him the immediate threat had passed. The recruits looked to him, chests heaving, anticipation flickering behind their exhaustion. The avian wiped dust from his visor and said, "Did we win that wave?" "For now," Kade answered. "But storms don't end just because you survived one." He rose slowly, joints aching from age rather than fear. The rifle hung at his side, warm from sustained fire. Around him, the recruits straightened, no longer a scattered group of strangers, but unit tempered by pressure and guided by the stark clarity of survival. They understood now. Not everything powerful glowed, hummed, or shimmered with advanced engineering. Sometimes it kicked, roared, and left brass in the sand. Another distant shriek echoed beyond the dunes, deeper and heavier than the others. The recruits stiffened. Kade adjusted the rifle's sling and met their eyes, calm despite the threat looming in the storm. "Lesson's not over," he said, stepping forward again. "Stay close. The worst is coming." The shriek rolled across the dunes like a serrated blade dragged through steel, deeper and heavier than any the recruits had heard. The storm thinned just enough for a massive silhouette to emerge. Towering, broad-shouldered, plated in dense ridges that refracted the twin sun's dying light into harsh, broken rainbows. The marauder Alpha moved with deliberate precision, each step sinking deep into the sand, each breath rattling the air with predatory certainty. The recruits instinctively tightened their formation, but Kade lifted a hand, steadying them before panic could take root. "Don't fire until I say," he murmured. His voice was calm, but not soft. It carried the weight of someone who had stood before impossible things and lived to tell about them. The recruits anchored themselves to that calm, though their weapons trembled slightly under the strain of fear. The Alpha paused, its faceted eyes scanning the storm as if tasting every vibration. Then it charged. Kade fired first. The AKM barked, sending a controlled burst toward the creature's advancing legs. The round struck, but the Alpha didn't fall. Its armor absorbed more impact than any lesser marauder. Still, the shots slowed it, staggering its rhythm. The recruits seized that hesitation, unleashing a coordinated burst of ballistic fire. Their rounds peppered the Alpha's shoulders and joints, forcing it to adjust its posture and narrow its charge. "Angle your shots," Kade shouted. "Go for the soft plates. If you can't find them, make them." The reptilian recruit moved with sharp instinct, sliding across the dune's slope to flank the Alpha. His shots drove the beast to twist, exposing a vulnerable stretch beneath its left arm. Kade dropped to one knee, exhaled through gritted teeth, and fired 3 precise rounds. The bullets slammed into the exposed gap, punching through flesh and splintering internal plates. The Alpha roared, staggering again. But the creature recovered with terrifying speed and lunged toward the silicon trooper at the end of the line. The trooper froze, unable to read the monster's feint through the storm's disorienting whirl. Kade sprinted forward, sand blasting his face, and shoved the trooper aside, just as the Alpha's claws carved a trench where he had stood. The impact knocked him off balance, but he rolled, came up kneeling, and fired point blank into the creature's throat joint. The AKM's report thundered through the storm. The Alpha convulsed, choking on its own fractured plates. With a guttural screech, it reared up, fury overtaking pain. The avian recruit leapt into action, wings folding tight as he slid down the dune slope, rifle braced to stabilize his aim. His shot struck the Alpha in the partially cracked throat, widening the wound. The creature finally collapsed, its bulk shaking the sand as it fell. Silence followed, long, heavy, suffocating. The recruits stared at the fallen Alpha, its refractive armor dimming as its lifeblood seeped into the dune. Kade remained still for a moment, breathing hard, sweat and sand clinging to his skin. The AKM hung from his hands, barrel smoking faintly. When he rose, the recruits did too, drawn to him by something deeper than respect. The reptilian recruit approached first. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "we mocked your weapon. We mocked you, but you saved every one of us today." His voice held no shame, only sincerity. The others nodded, their expressions softened by humility. Kade wiped the sand from the rifle's receiver, the familiar motion calming the tremor in his fingers. "Tools don't win battles," he said. "People do. Technology changes, but the principles don't. You learn your enemy, you trust your team, and you use whatever works." The avian recruit folded his wings, gaze steady. "Will you teach us more?" Kade slung the rifle over his shoulder, eyes drifting toward the darkening horizon where the storm finally began to break. "If you're willing to learn," he said, "then yes." Training starts again at first light. A faint glow from the twin suns peeked through the thinning clouds, scattering gold across the sand and the spent brass half buried within it. The recruits gathered around Kade, the storm's last remnants curling behind them as the desert exhaled its quiet approval. Together, they walked back toward the outpost, no longer a collection of strangers, but a unit forged by necessity, courage, and the sharp clarity of survival.